Welcome to YouTube Pedia. Discover the greatest stories from history, science, and beyond. If you're curious about the world, subscribe now and join our journey through knowledge. Let's get started. Muammar Gaddafi, the rise to power and the early years of his rule. Muammar Gaddafi, one of the most controversial and enigmatic leaders of the 20th century, left a lasting impact on Libya and the world. His rise to power was swift, dramatic, and marked by an ambition to reshape his nation. Born into a humble Bedouin family, Gaddafi rose to become the ruler of Libya, overthrowing the monarchy in a bloodless coup. His early years in power were characterized by ambitious reforms, sweeping changes, and a vision that sought to defy both Western and Eastern influences. Early life and influences. Muammar Mohammed Abu Minyar al-Gaddafi was born in 1942, though the exact date is uncertain, near Sirte, a coastal town in what was then the Kingdom of Libya. Raised in a Bedouin tent by illiterate parents, young Gaddafi experienced a life of hardship, deeply influenced by Arab nationalism and anti-colonial sentiments. As a child, he witnessed the lingering effects of Italian colonization and British influence, which fueled his desire to see Libya become an independent and powerful state. Gaddafi was an exceptional student, excelling in school and showing a strong interest in politics. Inspired by Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser, he adopted a deep admiration for Pan-Arabism, a movement that sought unity among Arab nations. This ideology shaped much of his early political thinking, motivating him to join the military as a means to change Libya from within. The road to revolution. Gaddafi enrolled in the Royal Military Academy in Benghazi, where he quickly gained a reputation for being disciplined and fiercely nationalist. During his military training, he formed a secret group with like-minded officers who shared his vision of overthrowing Libya's corrupt monarchy, which he saw as a puppet of Western imperialism. By the late 1960s, dissatisfaction with King Idris I was growing. The king was viewed as out of touch, allowing foreign interests, especially British and American military bases, to dominate Libya's economy. Meanwhile, the country's oil wealth had yet to benefit the average Libyan citizen. Sensing an opportunity, Gaddafi and his group of free officers planned a coup. The 1969 coup, overthrowing the monarchy. On September 1, 1969, while King Idris was away receiving medical treatment in Turkey, Gaddafi and his fellow officers seized control of the government in a swift and bloodless coup. The monarchy was abolished, and the Revolutionary Command Council, RCC, led by Gaddafi, declared Libya a republic. At just 27 years old, Gaddafi became the de facto leader of Libya. Unlike traditional military takeovers where power is transferred to a ruling elite, Gaddafi promised a new era, one where Libya's wealth would be used for the people rather than foreign interests. His charismatic speeches resonated with Libyans, especially the youth, who saw him as a symbol of change and resistance against Western exploitation. Early reforms and the vision for a new Libya. Gaddafi wasted no time in implementing radical changes. One of his first acts was expelling foreign military forces and closing British and American military bases. He also nationalized Libya's oil industry, ensuring that the nation's vast petroleum wealth was directed towards development projects rather than foreign corporations. This move significantly boosted Libya's economy and increased its geopolitical influence. Determined to create a unique political system, Gaddafi rejected both Western capitalism and Soviet communism. Instead, he introduced his own ideology, which he called the Third Universal Theory, outlined in his infamous Green Book. This book, published in 3 volumes between 1975 and 1979, presented Gaddafi's vision of a stateless society governed by the people through a system of direct democracy. While his ideas were theoretically ambitious, in practice, they led to an increasingly centralized form of power under his rule. Pan-Arabism and international influence. Gaddafi saw himself not just as the leader of Libya, but as a revolutionary figure for the entire Arab world. He sought to unite Arab nations under a single government, believing that Western imperialism had divided and weakened them. He attempted to merge Libya with Egypt, Syria, and Tunisia at different points, but these efforts ultimately failed due to political disagreements and distrust among Arab leaders. Despite setbacks, Gaddafi continued to push his pan-Arab ideology, providing financial and military support to various revolutionary movements across the Middle East and Africa. His outspoken opposition to Western powers, particularly the United States, made him a polarizing figure on the world stage. The challenges of leadership. While Gaddafi's early years in power were marked by economic growth and ambitious social reforms, such as free education, healthcare, and improved infrastructure, his leadership style soon became increasingly authoritarian. Dissent was not tolerated, and political opposition was swiftly crushed. Over time, his government developed a notorious reputation for human rights abuses, secret police surveillance, and the suppression of free speech. However, for many Libyans, the benefits of Gaddafi's rule in the early years outweighed the downsides. The country saw a significant rise in literacy rates, life expectancy, and overall living standards. But as time went on, Gaddafi's grip on power tightened, and his vision of a people's democracy began to resemble a personal dictatorship. The paradox of Gaddafi's early rule. The first decade of Gaddafi's rule was filled with both remarkable achievements and growing authoritarian tendencies. He transformed Libya from a weak monarchy into a powerful and independent oil-rich nation. He defied Western influence, championed pan-Arabism, and invested in social welfare programs. However, his rigid control over the government and suppression of opposition set the stage for the challenges that would define the later years of his rule. Global controversies, the fall from power, and his last days. Muammar Gaddafi's rule over Libya spanned more than 4 decades, making him one of the longest-serving and most controversial leaders in modern history. His early years were marked by economic growth, radical social reforms, and a defiant stance against Western influence. However, as the years went by, Gaddafi's leadership style became increasingly authoritarian, his foreign policies more aggressive, and his relations with the global community more turbulent. While he saw himself as a revolutionary hero, the world viewed him as a dictator, a sponsor of terrorism, and a man whose grip on power was unrelenting. This chapter explores the later years of Gaddafi's rule, his involvement in international conflicts, his ultimate downfall during the Arab Spring, and the dramatic final moments of his life. From revolutionary leader to absolute ruler. As Gaddafi consolidated power, his vision of a direct democracy, where people ruled themselves without a traditional government, remained an illusion. In practice, he maintained strict control over the country through his secret police, military, and a system of loyalist committees that ensured absolute obedience. Any form of dissent was met with brutal suppression, and those who opposed his rule often faced imprisonment, exile, or execution. By the 1980s, Gaddafi had transitioned from a popular revolutionary leader into an undisputed autocrat. His famous Green Book, which outlined his political ideology, was mandatory reading in schools, and his image was omnipresent throughout Libya. While he continued to advocate for a people's government, it was clear that power rested solely in his hands. International conflicts and the West's growing hostility. One of the key factors that shaped Gaddafi's later years was his complex and often hostile relationship with Western nations, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom. His anti-Western rhetoric, coupled with his support for various revolutionary and militant groups around the world, made him a constant target of Western intelligence agencies. Support for insurgent movements and accusations of terrorism. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Libya provided financial and military support to numerous insurgent groups across Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe. Gaddafi saw himself as the leader of global resistance against imperialism, openly supporting movements such as the Irish Republican Army (IRA) in Northern Ireland, Palestinian militant groups fighting against Israel, various African revolutionary factions seeking independence. However, his most infamous connection to global terrorism came in 1988 with the Lockerbie bombing. A Pan Am flight from London to New York exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing 270 people. Investigations linked Libyan intelligence agents to the attack, leading to severe international sanctions against Libya. This event significantly tarnished Gaddafi's global reputation, cementing his image as a rogue leader willing to use terrorism as a political tool. The U.S. airstrikes and Gaddafi's response. In 1986, following the bombing of a Berlin nightclub frequented by American soldiers, an attack allegedly linked to Libya, the United States, under President Ronald Reagan, launched airstrikes on Tripoli and Benghazi in Operation El Dorado Canyon. The strikes targeted key military sites and even Gaddafi's own residence, reportedly killing his adopted daughter. These attacks only fueled Gaddafi's anti-Western stance. He declared himself the victim of imperialist aggression and vowed to continue resisting Western influence. However, the airstrikes marked the beginning of his increasing international isolation. The shift in the 2000s, a surprising reconciliation. As the new millennium began, Gaddafi made an unexpected political shift. Realizing that international sanctions were crippling Libya's economy, he sought to restore diplomatic relations with the West. In 2003, Libya officially took responsibility for the Lockerbie bombing and agreed to compensate the victims' families. This move led to the lifting of economic sanctions, and Gaddafi even began cooperating with Western nations in the fight against terrorism following the 9/11 attacks. For a time, it seemed that Gaddafi was rebranding himself from a global pariah into a strategic partner. He hosted Western leaders, welcomed foreign investments, and attempted to present Libya as a reformed nation. However, beneath this facade, his grip on power remained as firm as ever, and internal dissatisfaction among the Libyan people was reaching dangerous levels. The Arab Spring and the collapse of Gaddafi's rule. By 2011, the Arab Spring had swept across the Middle East and North Africa, toppling long-standing dictatorships in Tunisia and Egypt. Inspired by these uprisings, Libyans took to the streets, demanding an end to Gaddafi's 4-decade-long rule. Gaddafi, however, refused to step down. Unlike the leaders of Tunisia and Egypt who resigned in the face of protests, he chose brutal repression. His security forces opened fire on demonstrators, sparking an armed rebellion. The situation quickly escalated into a full-scale civil war, with opposition forces seizing control of key cities. NATO intervention and the turning point. As reports of massacres and human rights abuses emerged, the international community intervened. The United Nations authorized a NATO-led military operation, which conducted airstrikes against Gaddafi's forces. The once mighty leader found himself rapidly losing ground as rebels, backed by Western air power, closed in on the capital. By August 2011, Tripoli had fallen, and Gaddafi was forced into hiding. His once loyal supporters abandoned him, and his regime crumbled. The man who had ruled Libya with an iron fist for 42 years was now a fugitive in his own country. The dramatic final moments. On October 20, 2011, Gaddafi was captured by rebel forces in his hometown of Sirte. His convoy was attacked by NATO airstrikes, and he was found hiding in a drainage pipe, disheveled, wounded, and pleading for his life. In chaotic footage that spread across the internet, he was dragged by rebel fighters before being brutally executed. His body was later put on public display, marking the gruesome end of one of the most controversial leaders in modern history. The legacy of Muammar Gaddafi, hero or tyrant. Even years after his death, Gaddafi remains a highly polarizing figure. To some, he was a revolutionary leader who defied Western imperialism, developed Libya's infrastructure, and provided free education and healthcare to his people. To others, he was a dictator who ruled through fear, crushed dissent, and was responsible for human rights abuses and acts of terrorism. Libya, in the aftermath of his fall, descended into chaos, with rival factions fighting for control. Many Libyans who had initially celebrated his removal later found themselves longing for the stability, however repressive, it had once known under his rule. The rise and fall of a controversial figure. Muammar Gaddafi's life was a paradox of ambition, power, and downfall. From a young revolutionary who overthrew colonial rule to a dictator who clung to power at all costs, his story remains one of the most fascinating and debated in modern history. Whether seen as a hero or a villain, his impact on Libya and the world is undeniable, and his legacy continues to shape the nation he once ruled. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our upcoming exciting content.